I do want to talk about another politician, though, who gave a cracking first speech in the Senate yesterday. It was the Liberal Senator for South Australia, Kerrynne Liddle. We've spoken to her before. She's a Narenta woman who hails from Alice Springs, and in her speech she railed against Labor's plans to axe the cashless debit card, which has helped to protect some Indigenous communities.
The card is an important part of a broader suite of solutions. It gives power and respite to the most vulnerable men, women and children and the elderly. Yes, those who need it most, and it is those people, not the drinkers and drug users, not the abusers, who will suffer the most from its withdrawal.
I spoke with Senator Liddle earlier, congratulated her on her speech and asked her why the cashless debit card was such an important issue for her.
Look, I think the first speech provides an opportunity for me to talk about the issues that were really important to me and clarify how I will approach all of the issues that we will be presented with in this term of Parliament. The cashless debit card is a really important issue for me because in the state of South Australia we have the cashless debit card in Ceduna, but also obviously the card exists in other areas across Australia in different forms.
I've heard firsthand how people say this is really helping some people in those communities. Do you fear that getting rid of the cashless debit card could increase domestic violence, drug abuse, could actually end up with lives being lost?
Well, it's interesting you use the word fear because, you know, it's been really clear to me for quite some time that people who actually support the card and the benefits that they have seen in their own communities from the card actually fear speaking out even against the card. So, you know, there's that level of fear. And then there's a fear of people actually who talk to me and say, look, we've experienced the turmoil in our lives. We don't want to revisit it. I think it's important to say, you know, the card is not intended to be a panacea, but it is an important part of the mix of things that can be done, actions that individuals can take in order to make sure there's food on the table and reduce the amount of the impact of violence and abuse that might be around them.
But you've dealt with these issues in South Australia and in the Northern Territory. You've dealt firsthand with people who have suffered from all sorts of abuse and torment, whether it's through drugs, through gambling, through domestic violence. What do you think will happen if the communities that currently have access to the cashless debit card no longer can do so?
Well, I guess the fundamental question that I actually asked in my first speech yesterday was, when people are screaming human rights, whose rights are they actually talking about? Is it the people that are going to be most affected by this? Is it the children? Is it the mothers? Is it the men? Is it the elders that we know fill the hospitals and the morgues sometimes? I know that from personal experience, when alcohol-fuelled violence is let rip in a community. And I think it's really important, if the Labor Party wants to remove the cashless debit card and they're insistent on that there's a proper, orderly transition to help these people to adjust.
Yeah, it's an incredibly dangerous thing to do, where even one family is benefiting from this, then you rip it away, then there could be horrible consequences. Now, you mentioned in your speech too, Kerrynne, that you think when it comes to Indigenous affairs, some of the difficult issues you've just referenced, the governments sometimes don't listen to the right voices, to the right people on where the solutions are. Does that mean that you're interested in the idea of an Indigenous voice to Parliament?
Well, I think there's a long way to go on the discussion about voice. I've publicly said that I have some real concerns about the level of detail that we have at this point, and I'd like to see more, and I'd like to even understand more about when we talk about the 3 sentences that are the proposed words to be inserted in the Constitution. I think it's still unclear. What do we mean by matters, given that previously the conversation was about legislation? You know, how will this actually work? And how will this actually make a difference for the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the ground? I know there are a lot of people, you know, that we're hearing from regularly that are talking about support for the voice. I think we also need to make sure that we allow time for those who have real concerns with whose voice is going to be listened to, how they engage with voice, before we actually start looking at a framework about what voice is.
Yeah, you're firmly in the camp then of show us more detail, and I think the government's really got to come up with more detail on this. They're trying to have a debate in a vacuum at the moment. Let me go back to your speech, Kerrynne, because you and I have known each other a long while. I first met you when you were a journalist. You've also worked in business and industry, and you drew on some of that experience, of course, in your speech. And one tone of optimism, I suppose, you shared is that you know the media are always looking for fear, for hysteria, for division, but you said you have great faith in mainstream Australians to actually hold sensible, common sense debates about the issues that matter.
And I think that's a whole range of issues. I think that we need to make sure that when we're in our schools, in the education system, in the tertiary system, we're not teaching people what to think. We teach them how to think. And I think that's a really important part of changing the way the debate and the discussion happens, is actually giving people the capacity to take in the information, chuck it around a bit, work out, what are the facts from the fiction, and determine the way they want to go forward.
Yeah, great sentiments there, Senator. Thanks for joining us, and congratulations again on your first speech, Senator Kerrynne Liddle.
Thank you, Chris.